It's hard to pass by this adorable book without noticing the creative title and cute kitten. But in another country, this book is called something else.
The term, the cat's meow, doesn't mean anything to people in England. It's just not an expression.
There's even a different picture on the front for readers overseas. That's just one of the stories you'll hear in this chat with author Jonathan B. Losos. Hi, it's Julie with HEC Books, where we talk with authors about their latest titles. Click the subscribe button to see all of our conversations, and make sure to stick around to the end to find out what a cat is saying when they meow. Welcome, Jonathan B. Losos. Thanks for being here.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
I loved your book. I do have to tell you, I have 5 dogs, but if I wasn't allergic to cats, I would have a basement full of cats everywhere.
Well, that is so sad. Cat allergies are an interesting topic, but
Yeah.
a lot of people have them, as you undoubtedly know.
Right. But they're so fascinating. So let's talk about your book. Give a brief description of the book for people who haven't read it yet.
Sure. Well, the short story is that, so I'm a scientist, and my day job is I've spent my career studying lizards, how they adapt to the environment, what they do, and so on. But I'm a cat lover. You have 5 dogs, I have 4 cats. And ever since I was 5 years old, I've loved cats. But it never possibly dawned on me to do research on cats. I just didn't think there was much interesting science going on. And you know, I wanted to study animals out in nature. And to do that, well, I wanted to watch them, see what they were doing. And anyone who has tried to follow a cat outside realizes how impossible that is, that as soon as a cat figures out what you're doing, it's off into the bushes and away, and you can't see them. So I just didn't think that there was much interesting cat science going on. And then I discovered I was absolutely wrong, that scientists are studying cats, and by cats I mean domestic cats, house cats and their unowned outside equivalents. Just like I study lizards, like my colleagues study lions and elephants and hippos, you know, everything from radio tracking to chemical analyses to DNA sequencing. And there is actually quite a fascinating body of literature on cats. And well, I decided to teach a course. I'm a college professor, to teach a course on the science of cats. And the idea was I would sucker the students in on cats and then teach them how we study nature just using cats as the vehicle. And so the course was lots of fun, and so that led to the idea, well, why not write a book? Just all this fascinating information we have about cats and how we've learned it. And so that's what the book is about. It's just what cats do, how they evolved, how they came to be, how they are, what they might do in the future, and how scientists actually know this.
I can't believe there's so much information out there about cats. I was like, there are chapters and chapters. It was so interesting, from the DNA to how they're related to cats in the wild. There's just so much stuff. How did you research this book?
Well, I mean, in part, that's my job. I read the scientific literature. The interesting and somewhat surprising, maybe I was naive, is how much information there is on the internet that is either wrong or you just can't verify it. There are these statements that will be made, even by websites that seem very authoritative, that you just can't track it down to its source. Just to give you one example, there's a widely quoted statistic that the National Highway Safety Board commissioned a study that found that 5.4 million cats a year are run over on our highways. 5.4 million.
Aw, terrible.
Well, it's not true, or at least I can't find any evidence that study ever existed.
Thank God for that.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a lot. Anyway, what I had to do was to get into the scientific literature and, find out what we really do know.
So it sounds like you didn't Google it, because a lot of the Google stuff's wrong.
Well, exactly. My job, I read scientific papers, and the book took me about a year longer to write than I expected, because there is actually so much research out there, and I read it all. I read about 2,000 papers for this. So there's a lot out there, and I'm a scientist. It's my job to read that stuff and think about it and synthesize it, and that's what I did.
How many years did this book take?
It depends how you count it, and of course I have a day job, which was a little distracting, but about 5 years. 5 years from the day I started to till today.
So let's talk about the title, The Cat's Meow, How Cats Evolved from the Savannah to Your Sofa.
Yes, so there's kind of 2 different stories about the title. The first is, the initial thought was how the cat got its meow, sort of the Rudyard Kipling how-to stories. And we shortened it to the cat's meow because that's a phrase that most people know. It means something that's really good. But a funny side note is that the book is being published in the UK next week. They have a different title. And the reason is that the term, the cat's meow, doesn't mean anything to people in England. It's just not an expression. And so over there, it's going to be called The Age of Cats. So that's sort of where the name came from. But the other reason, the more scientific one in a way, is, at least to me, the meow of a cat is its quintessential trait. When you think, what is it that cats do? They meow. And they meow to us. Anyone who's lived with a cat knows that they're talking to you. They're trying to say something when they meow specifically to us. I thought, when I started this project, I thought that cats meowed to each other all the time to communicate, and that they were just including us in their social circle by meowing to us. Turns out that's not true. That researchers have gone out and studied colonies of cats living outside. They don't meow to each other very much. They make other noises, they'll hiss and growl, and they do other things, but they really only rarely meow to each other. So the fact that they meow to us is something special, something that, you might think that, when the domestic cat was domesticated, it evolved, took the meow. That's not the case, because other species of cats also meow. And if you want to have some fun, if you like cats, go onto the internet and just type meow bobcat or meow serval or meow ocelot. And no, there's a rock band named Ocelot. Don't do that. I learned that. And you'll find there are videos of other cats meowing, and they don't sound exactly the same as house cats, but they do meow. So the domestic cat didn't invent the meow to talk to us, but they did change the meow from their ancestor. They made the sound more pleasing to our ears. And that's a scientific result of a study demonstrating that.
I remember that from your book, because you were talking about if people could recognize the meows from their cats. And so since I have dogs, I was like, I totally love this chapter because I can tell what my dogs are barking at, whether it's a person outside, whether they're hungry. Like, I know what the sound of each bark means. And it's so cool that cats kind of have the same things with their people.
Well, they do. There's a slight difference, though, that dogs, from one dog to another, there's some similarity in some of their barks. That if you hear about it, that's a dog, I'm scared bark. And that's kind of the same from one dog to the other. In people with cats, that's not the case, that a cat will have multiple meows and it will use those meows in different contexts, but there's no universality. That one cat's, I'm hungry, I want to be fed meow is not the same as another cat will make a different meow. But the people who live with the cat can understand them. They can understand their own cat because they've kind of worked it out in a way. Oh, you're hungry, or that's your whatever meow. But any other cat, they can't understand it at all. So in some ways, it's more complex than with dogs.
I wish they meowed more out, like with strays would meow at each other, because I thought like they have their own language, they're talking cat language, but apparently they're not really doing that.
Well, not with the meow. They have plenty of other signals that they communicate with, but not with the meow.
So who is the cat on the cover?
Well, that is some photo company's cat.
What? This should have been your cat.
Well, I agree, but I was overruled, and I can tell you this, there was never any question that there would be a kitten on the cover, because they're so adorable. Yes. But again, the British cover is very different. The British have a very different sensibility about what makes a good cover for a book like this.
Who's on the cover of
this?
It's
It's a painting, and it's kind of a retro, 1950s-ish, stylized cat.
Well, aren't they just fancy?
Well, those Brits. What do you expect?
But you did bring your cats here because cats are on your socks right now. Who's on your socks?
That is Nelson. Nelson is he's the star of the book. He's not the star, but I do mention a bunch of my other cats and my past cats. But
Winston.
Yep. Jane.
Yes.
Some of the older ones, Kiraka and Marisha and so on. Can I tell you something that I'm particularly pleased about? So I proofread the book, and I did not put together the index. The publisher hired someone to go through the book and put all the index. And when I got to the index, Nelson wasn't mentioned. So I went back and I found every page that Nelson is mentioned and my other cats. And so if you want to read just about my cats, you can just go to those pages.
That is genius. Yep. I love that you're a big cat lover like that. I would do that for my dogs too. I'd be like, they need to be on. We need to know every page they're on.
Absolutely. Agreed.
It's really cool that your book dedicated to your dad. He gave you your love of cats.
Yes. Well, the story behind that is my dad grew up with cats himself. He loved cats. He would tell everyone that he thought that either in a previous life or the next life, he was a jaguar. And so he loved going to see the jaguars at the zoo. Anyway, when I was 5, I went with my mother to the Animal Protective Association, which is on Hanley Road here in St. Louis, and we adopted a stray Siamese cat. And it was for my dad's birthday. And so we brought the cat home. I still remember this. One of my earliest memories, we're in the kitchen, and it was a rainy day, and so my dad came in through the garage, and he came in the door, and the cat, I was trying to hide the cat behind my legs, my little skinny little boy, 5-year-old legs.
Right.
But the cat started meowing, and so gave away the surprise. So that's when we got Tammy, our first cat, Tammy Rami Glinda cat Losos. And 2 years later, we adopted another shelter cat, and ever since, I've been crazy about cats.
Tammy Rami Glinda cat Losos.
Yes.
Now
Well,
that's a good cat name.
Tammy
right
was
there.
my summer camp counselor.
Oh.
Rami rhymed with Tammy. Glinda was the other counselor, so it was only fair that they both.
Right.
and
I was
then-
like Glinda the Good Witch.
Well,
thought that was
maybe
from
that's why
Wizard of
she
Oz.
was. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And of course, cat to distinguish them from the human members of the family.
I love that. Before we talk about the fact that you are from St. Louis, which is super cool, I also thought it was cool that your sister adopts black cats.
Yes, she does.
What a great lady.
Yes. Black cats have a hard row in
They
life.
do. So do
Yep.
black dogs. I didn't realize that black cats had the same issues.
I didn't know that black dogs had the same.
They have a hard
issues.
time getting adopted in shelters.
Well, you know, the story on black cats is that they were persecuted in the Middle Ages because people thought that they were either the witch's familiar, sidekick, or maybe a witch herself had transformed into a cat. And so they just brutally killed all the black cats and lots of other cats as well.
Crazy.
And there is some belief, it's not proven, that the Black Plagues of medieval times may have been a result because they got rid of all their cats, the rat population exploded, and the Black Plague is transmitted by fleas on rats. And so that may have been a consequence of that massacre of cats.
Well, I always try to tell people black cats are good luck, especially on Friday the 13th.
There you go.
They're amazing.
Agreed.
Everybody needs a black cat.
True.
Okay, so you are from St. Louis, which is really cool because a lot of times we have authors, come to town from different places, but you're from here.
I am. It's true.
I love that. And you work at WashU.
Correct. I'm a professor there.
And that's where you teach your class that people can take. Is it a WashU class, The
Yes.
Science of Cats?
Yes, exactly.
Is that a well-received class? It
Well-
would be fun to take if I was there.
Well, I've taught it twice. The
Okay.
first, I was at Harvard for a number of years before coming back. I was at WashU, then I moved to Harvard, then I've come back. I taught it for the first time at Harvard, and then I taught it again just this past semester. So I can't tell you if it was well received because we're just finishing the first semester, but the students seem to have liked it. They're writing their term papers now, and I hope to teach it again, next year.
I was surprised to see that 85% of cats are mutts.
Yes.
And only 50% of dogs are mutts.
That's correct. That purebreds, if you will, or we call them pedigreed now, are much more common in the dog world than in the cat world. And another thing, in the United States, even mutts, if you will, usually have pedigreed dogs as their ancestors, that they are a mix of several different breeds. Mm-hmm. That is not true of cats. Most cats have never had a pedigreed ancestor. They've been mutts all the way back through their ancestry.
Was this book on your mind for a long time? Or were you just kind of like, I think I'm going to write a book about cats?
Well, it was, the way it happened is this. Number one, I've always liked writing. And as I told you about 10 years ago, I discovered there was all this science about cats. And the first time I taught this class. And at the same time, I finally decided to write a book about evolution, which is what I do my research on. And it was about how evolution occurs. And I really enjoyed writing this book. It was just so much fun to try to take the science and present it in a way that people would be interested in it. It's not rocket science. I could explain it, but could I make it interesting? That was the real challenge. And so I really enjoyed doing that. And just as I was wrapping up that book, I taught the class on cats. And, the next step was obvious. Well, I'd like to write another book. This thing on cats is doing well. Let's write a book on cats. And so that's how it came to be. Can I just say one more thing about that?
Yeah, please do.
One of the
Please
most
do.
fun things about the first book and this book has been getting to know some of the scientists whose research I talk about in the book. And I would contact people, and they would be just incredibly generous in telling me the story behind their research. What happened in the study that doesn't get into the scientific paper, all the things that went wrong, all the fails, and all the crazy twists and turns that led them to the paper they actually published. And even more generally, how did they become a cat scientist? Nobody that I talked to started out saying, I think I'm going to study cats, that they wanted to study cancer or human behavior or something, and just one twist led to another, and they ended up studying cats. And so the great stories, and people were so kind with their time, and then I had fun trying to, be a journalist essentially and tell their stories. And that's one of the parts I've enjoyed the most about writing these books.
How do you become a cat scientist?
Well, I feature a number of scientists in the book, as you know.
Right.
There is one woman who initially wanted to cure cancer. And actually, she wanted to cure muscular dystrophy, having watched the Jerry Lewis telethon. And so she went to graduate school to learn genetics and to learn, how you do research on human diseases. And then at some point, she transferred over to studying animal diseases. She saw that it could transfer over and that the field was a little more open. And then the FBI had started a CSI animals lab.
Oh.
And she applied for it. And if she had gotten it, she would have probably done that the rest of her life. But the FBI stupidly didn't hire her. And she ended up being the world's leading authority on cat genetics. And she has found all of these mutations that cause cat diseases and have come up ways to solve them. And so that's one answer.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's just these quirky things. People don't intend to do that. I mean, now I think where cat science has matured, I think people perhaps do want to do that from the outset. But the people in my book, none of them started out that way.
You have so much information about cats in this book. Was there anything that really stood out to you that surprised you the most?
Well, there were a bunch of things. One I've mentioned already, that the cats don't meow to each other. Another fact is that, and this is pertinent to my own cats. So I've got two of my older cats, Winston and Jane, are litter mates. And their mother was a stray cat that was run over and killed, sadly. And somehow somebody knew that she had just had kittens, and they went and rescued the kittens and raised them up, and then we adopted them 4 months later. But the point is, they're in the same litter. They look nothing alike. Winston is a really big cat. He's really muscular. He's black, gray and white. And Jane is petite and slate gray. And it's like, how can these be brother and sister? Well, I think I found out the answer. It turns out that free-ranging cats, females, when they're in estrus, when they're reproductively receptive, will mate with lots of different males. They will copulate 20 times a day, sometimes for 4 or 5 days on end, with many different males. And so it is quite common for litter mates to have different fathers. And
wow.
I would bet a lot that that's the explanation for Jane and Winston looking so different.
So genetically, there's a way to have different babies in your stomach from different dads?
Well, basically, not to get into too many of the gory details,
right.
But the female mates with a number of males and has the sperm from them, and they're floating around. And
wow.
One male sperm fertilizes one egg, and another male sperm fertilizes another egg.
That is bizarre.
Exactly. Or here's a perhaps just more of a fun fact.
Love it.
People claim that there are a lot of myths about cats we should talk about. But people claim that if you died in your house, your cat would eat you. Turns out, and if they're locked in and no one discovered you, turns out dogs do it much more often. So
really?
You better beware, or maybe
I
won't
will
matter.
be careful. Dang.
Yeah,
okay.
There is a small literature on this, and there are many more examples of that happening with dogs than with cats.
That's kind of fun. Any other myths that you have about cats that you've learned?
Two myths that are, kind of important ones. One is, people think that cats can't be trained. Absolutely wrong. Cats are very trainable. There are books, there are websites, and all kinds of things. It's the same way you train any other animal. And it turns out that cats are very food-focused. So they're very trainable. And you can train them to do all kinds of things, and there's videos online. But there's this wonderful group I saw called the Savitsky cats that were on America's Got Talent, and they have shows all the time. The things they train cats to do are astonishing. So they're very trainable, including you can train a cat to use the toilet. And so you don't need kitty litter.
What?
I've never heard of dogs doing that, but yes,
No.
Yep, you can do that. So cats are very trainable. It's just a myth that they aren't. The other myth is that cats are aloof loners and that they're asocial. And it turns out that that's not necessarily correct either. Now, the standard wisdom is that there is one social species of feline, and that's the lion. The lion lives in prides, and the prides are composed of a lot of females that are related to each other because the females don't disperse when they grow up. They stay in the pride, so the females are all sisters or cousins or whatever. The males leave, and new males come in, unrelated males. That's how lions prevent inbreeding. But all the females are related, and they're very friendly and sociable. They groom each other, they lie on top of each other, they play with each other. They will even nurse each other's cubs, and of course, they hunt together as well. So it's a very social species, and it was long thought that they were essentially the only social species. However, it turns out that colonies of domestic cats, outdoor cats that are unowned, have a very similar social structure to lions. And the way that works is so you have to have a high density of the cats, a lot of them, and that only occurs when there's a lot of food. And that happens when there are people putting out a lot of food for them, as occurs in many places, or on farms, or places like fishing villages where there's a lot of fish scraps that are left. Where there's a lot of food, you get a big cat population, and that cat population will form into a bunch of groups, and each group will be very much like a lion pride. It will be, again, the members of that group will be females that are related, and they're extraordinarily friendly to each other. They lie with each other, they groom, they're just friendly, they nurse each other's kittens. There's even reports of them acting like midwives, one female helping another give birth. And so in those circumstances, cats can be just as social as lions are. In fact, they should be called prides. I don't know why we call them clouders, which is a dumb term if you ask me.
Oh, I've never heard. So that's a group of cats called a clouder.
Yes, and if you look up on the internet, there's contradictory explanations, and I couldn't find out I couldn't get to the bottom of where that term comes from. But they're just like lion prides, except in one way. Lions are famous for hunting cooperatively. They work together very sophisticated ways to capture prey that are much too big for any one lion to bring down on its own. Thankfully, domestic cats don't do that. Imagine a pack of cats, ambushing a groundhog or something, or even bigger. That would be terrifying, but they do not do that. But in really many other ways, domestic cats are very social animals, or they can be in the right circumstances. And one reason people think that they're aloof loners is, remember, those groups are all related cats that grew up with each other. And one scientist basically said the cardinal cat rule is, if you've lived with this cat all your life, be friendly to it. If not, be very wary. So when you put together two cats that didn't grow up together, well, they're not going to be friendly. And so the take-home message is, if you want a couple of cats, get litter mates. And, anyway, so cats
But if you can't do that, it could still work out.
It can work out. It can work out, but also oftentimes it doesn't. Now, sometimes that's because people don't introduce them the right way, but it's a much better bet to get two at the same time.
Interesting. Do lions have a meow that they do?
No, they do not. The bigger cats have different vocal cord structures, and they do not meow. Of course, they roar and they have other ways of communicating, but they do not meow. But the cheetah. No, cheetahs purr. I don't think they meow. They chirp. They make a funny.
Oh, really?
It sounds like a bird.
Cute.
But the mountain lion, which actually can get to 70, 80 pounds, even bigger, the mountain lion is essentially a little cat just that got big. And like a lion has a really big head for its body size, a mountain lion has a smaller head. It's really just a cat that got bigger. They purr. Mountain lions purr.
I don't ever want to hear that ever.
Well,
I mean, too close to a mountain lion.
Good point. Good point.
Unless I'm at the St. Louis Zoo.
There you go. Exactly.
Why does a cat leave a dead mouse at your feet?
Well,
what is that all about? Is it really a gift?
There are a number of questions like that. The real answer is we don't know. I mean, but people have all these ideas that might. Well, my favorite idea is that the cat realizes that you are an inept hunter. And just like with their own kittens, they want to train you to be a good hunter by giving you something to hone your skills on.
Oh.
Is that...
My cat's trying to train me? I have a cat?
Well, they train you in many ways.
They
but,
probably do.
Do you know the expression? Well, you read it in the book. Dogs have owners, cats have staff.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so-
That is true then.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Where do they get this catitude from? That's what I need to know.
Well, that is, that's just what they're born with. It's the cat way.
It was interesting to hear, to read about where cats came from. Where were they from Egypt? Were they from another place? So what kind of, can you tell us? Because I know a lot of information is in it about the book, so you have to read that. But, I mean, they're in all these hieroglyphics. Obviously, they were in Egypt as a member of their families, I guess.
It's a two-part question. The first is there are all these species of small cats. And so the first question people had a while ago is, which species was the ancestor? And we figured that out, first by comparing their anatomy and then by looking at their DNA. It's clearly the North African wildcat. So we know which species they descended from, but the North African wildcat has a range from Central Africa up north and then over to the Arabian Peninsula and into Turkey and Syria and Iraq and countries like that. And so the question is, where in that range were they domesticated? Now, what you were just mentioning, certainly by about 3,500 years ago, there are all these paintings on tomb walls depicting cats that are clearly domesticated. They're wearing collars, they're eating food out of a dish underneath the dining room table, they're going out into the marsh on family outings in a boat. So clearly they're domesticated in Egypt by 3,500 years ago. But the question is that where it happened, or did it occur somewhere earlier in the region and elsewhere? And probably, or it could have occurred in multiple places. The biggest alternative candidate is somewhere in the vicinity of Turkey, and for two reasons. One is the people in Turkey today are just crazy about cats, and there's this great movie Kedi that came out a couple years ago about cats in Istanbul, which if you're a cat lover you should watch. But more scientifically, the oldest known association of people and cats of domestic cats or similar cats is a archaeological find on the island of Cyprus, which is in the Mediterranean near Turkey, from roughly 10,000 years ago. And this archaeological site has a person, an adult, buried with all kinds of treasured possession, axes and flint and pieces of ochre. And at the foot of this, I want to say him, but we don't know if it was a man or a female, was a cat, an 8-month-old cat, carefully laid out on its side in its own little mini grave. And so the implication is that the cat, too, was a treasured possession of the person. In addition, wildcats, the African wildcat, is not native to Cyprus, so it must have been brought there by people. And so that and the fact that the cat was so carefully buried suggested that this was a domesticated cat 10,000 years ago. Now, there is another explanation, and that is that it was just an African wildcat that had been tamed, that you raise. You mentioned mountain lions. If you got a mountain lion cub and you raised it and were very nice to it, it would be pretty tame. But that's not the same as being a domesticated animal. A tame animal is biologically, genetically, the same as its wild relatives. It's just been raised nicely. A domesticated animal has actually evolved. It's changed genetically as part of the domestication process. And so that's the big question. Did that start 10,000 years ago in Cyprus or somewhere in Turkey? Or was it not until 3,500 years ago in Egypt? So we have, it's somewhere in there that domestication occurred, and we really don't know at this point. There's some great research going on where people are getting DNA out of skeletons like that one in archaeological remains, or out of Egyptian cat mummies. And their goal is to try to find the genetic changes that occurred in domestication that would actually pinpoint, oh, yes, here's one from Jordan 6,000 years ago, and it's got the domestication genes, or maybe it doesn't. But we don't know yet.
Another chapter that I found really interesting was when you were talking about feline infidelity and how your cat might have another family somewhere.
Yes.
That they go visit and they hang out with, and that I was laughing out loud whenever you were talking about that.
But it's, this is another kind of research that people can actually do in their own home is National Geographic Society, as well as some Australian researchers, made little cameras to put on the collar of cats. And so the cat's walking around and you're getting the cat's eye view. And it showed all kinds of things that no one had any clue that cats do. including, well, people did have a clue of this, going into other people's houses, going in through the little cat door, eating the other cat's food, sometimes just making themselves at home.
Oh, my
and,
gosh.
So they will do that, and they will do all kinds of other things, too. So that's been a fascinating view on cat life.
We have a neighborhood cat on my street that everybody just kind of takes care of, and he goes in a couple of people's houses. And I was like, when we were talking about like putting a GPS on the cats, it'd be so interesting to see where he's going. 'Cause
Yes.
like you said, a lot of times they go here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah, and you can do that, too. There are commercial little trackers you put on their collar, and you can see where they go.
I love it. So much information in the Cat's Meow. Is there going to be a Cat's Meow 2? Or did you give us everything?
Well, I really enjoyed writing this book, and I did not give everything. There are some topics that I didn't get into too much, particularly cats and their impact on the environment, which is a really hairy question. And initially I was going to tackle that
Pun
in this book.
intended.
Yes, exactly.
You got to get those in there.
True. It's a really, there's lots of interesting research, but it was just too much, and it was sort of distracting from the central focus of this book. So, but I think there's important things. We got a real problem with this, and anyway, I'm thinking about that.
I love that. We're going to have your cat on the cover for that one.
Well, all right, we will. I'll let you do the negotiating for me.
I'll make it happen.
Excellent.
The Cat's Meow, How Cats Evolved from the Savannah to Your Sofa. Jonathan B. Losos, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you. This has been delightful.
Thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this conversation. Get notified when new conversations come out by clicking subscribe.